Just how different is the Tinder experience in different cities around the world? Are some cities much easier to get dates than others? Are you living in a city that makes it much harder to get results on Tinder? I've just tried Tinder in a bunch of different cities, and these are my results. Now, for transparency, the first thing I should do is quickly explain how I set this experiment up. So what I did was I created just one account, and I used this as a Tinder Gold account because what I wanted to do is set my location to different cities around the world using the Tinder Gold option. And what I did was I hid my distance. So women would see me in a certain city, which you'll see all the cities I did, but they won't see how far away I am from them in reality. Because normally speaking, when you use Tinder Gold to change your city, it still shows how far away you are, which is ridiculous. So yeah, I masked that. The other thing I did was I kept my profile the same for all of them. I kept my description the same for all of them. Now, if you'd like to know, because you're going to see my results, and some of you are going to think, geez, this guy's getting really great results. How does he do it? I'm not going to go into detail on that here. If you'd like to see a basic sort of rundown of how I get great results on Tinder, go ahead and check out this video, which I'll link to up here. Check that out. I show you how I get 14 dates in 4 hours, just with a bit of like really high quality work on my Tinder account. Go check it out. But yeah, that's what I did. And I didn't change the language, even though I was like putting a profile in different cities with different languages. So what I would do is I'd create my account in Sydney, for example. I'd leave it dormant for 24 hours. And then after 24 hours, I'd start swiping, right? And what I would do is I would swipe right to the first 100 women it showed me. And I would swipe right at 8 p.m. local Sydney time. That's another really important one because 8 p.m. is a busy Tinder time of day, and I wanted to keep the times that I use Tinder in that local city the same, so that, you know, as many contacts as possible were left the same, so we could really compare, you know, apples with apples, as they say. Once I'd gotten matches in that city, I would start having conversations with them. So then I'd start conversing with them and try to get them out on a date, or at least try to get them to agree to go on a date, because of course I couldn't go on a date with these girls because I wasn't in their city. But I would get them to agree to a date and give me a number. And so I recorded the number who agreed to go on a date as well to give us a little bit more information about, hey, it's one thing to get matches, it's another thing to get women to go on dates with you. So how did everything shake out in the end? Well, let's have a little bit of a look at the results. So first of all, we're just looking at the matches per 100 swipes here, and I've ordered them in increasing order. And what do we see? Well, we see, interestingly, that Europe doesn't perform very well here. So Copenhagen is the worst with 11 matches per 100 swipes. Then London with 12, Amsterdam with 14. So only 14% in Amsterdam, which is a shame because I'm Dutch originally. Then we've got Sydney, funnily enough. Sydney is a harder place in general to get matches than Gold Coast. And then we work our way up. Paris were more friendly. Melbourne was more friendly. By the way, just a note, Melbourne is more friendly than pretty much anywhere in Australia. Melbourne's great. Love Melbourne, even though I grew up in Sydney and technically I should hate Melbourne. Anyway, sorry for another day. Then we work our way up. LA, New York, Rio de Janeiro with 31. That's like twice as good as Sydney. Almost. Medellin is definitely twice as good as Sydney for getting matches. Bangkok, Hong Kong, Santo Domingo. And I'm going to go into sort of, I guess, some things that I've learned from seeing these numbers, some things that were not obvious, some things that were obvious before I even ran the test that I was sure the results would be. But now that we know what the match rate is, did the match rate line up with the number of women who actually agreed to go on a date with me? So if we have a look at that instead, so now you know what, the order is relatively similar. So we've got Amsterdam now is the worst performing. So if I went to Amsterdam and because it doesn't matter how many matches you get, what really matters is how many women will go on a date with you, right? So Amsterdam in the whole world, or at least all the places that I tried, was the worst performer, followed by Copenhagen, then London, then Sydney. So a lot of these, you'll notice the order is relatively similar across the board. A few changes in positioning as we worked our way up. So that's the number that agreed to date, but what about the conversion rate? So what about the percentage of women? So, how once I matched, how willing were the women to go on a date with me? So if I look at the percentage, then things begin to change a little bit. If we look here, then we suddenly find New York is the worst performer. So if I get only 37% of the women that I match with in New York, I could get out on a date. So So that was interesting, right? Like New York didn't perform too badly overall for getting matches, but I had to work really hard to get those matches onto dates. They're the hardest in the world. Then followed by LA, then Amsterdam, then Hong Kong, right? So Hong Kong was right near the top with numbers of matches, right? Sydney starts to perform a bit better, Bangkok, Gold Coast, Melbourne. So as I work my way up, again, okay, Rio de Janeiro. So Latin America, by the way, you'll notice tends to be some of the best. But interestingly, London has made its way all the way to the top. So that's been interesting. And so if you look at these figures, if you sort of just take a minute to look through all these, what do you see? Like what's going to leap out at you here is that in most countries where women are very picky with who they match with, they tend to be then more likely to go on a date with you once they've matched with you. So it's not necessarily that, it is in some cities, but in most cities it's not necessarily that if they're hard to match with, they're hard to get in a date. It's usually if they're hard to match with, they're easy to get in a date. If they're easy to match with, they're harder to get in a date. You know, like Hong Kong took a swipe all the way towards the bottom. Same with Bangkok, went from right towards the top to sort of in the middle, below middle area. So that's a really interesting finding. Now, there are definitely some other not quite scientific findings or things that I experienced that I want to share with you all as I did these experiments. And I did more experiments than just this that I'm going to be posting up in other videos, but I'm going to show you some little things, or at least tell you some little things that I did notice. Different cities definitely seem to prefer different kinds of male profiles. And I really noticed that, not just looking at my own experience here, but working with clients from different cities in the world. So, you know, different cities have a different sensitivities to height. So America is much more height sensitive, for example, than Europe, interestingly. You know, I noticed that if I, in other experiments where I've put my height in Netherlands, the tallest people in the world, or Northern Europe, which is like, tends to have some of the tallest men in the world, interestingly, women were less height sensitive than they were in the United States or Australia. I find that really interesting. So many more women who were taller than me in these countries were willing to go on a date with me than in America or Australia. And I found that fascinating. But again, these little things that you pick up as you sort of move around the world, little sensitivities, like different countries, women preferred blonde guys or preferred like guys with dark hair. They preferred guys who were more modeling style shots work best in the United States. They work in Europe, but not quite as well. You know, Australia tends to be in the middle ground. I found that topless shots worked really worked better in LA than they do in New York by a large margin. So if you've got a guy with a good body in LA, it tends to work much better, or in Miami. But if you do it in New York, I think women just roll their eyes and go, oh, what a moron, and don't bother matching with you. So that's also interesting, right? You get these different things in different countries. So when you've got a Tinder profile, you need to be aware that there are going to be different expectations for how guys should behave in those countries. Perhaps not surprising as well was that if I was in another country around the world or another city outside of Australia, and I wrote that I was Australian, if I added that to the profile, that would increase my match rate in pretty much every country around the world. And that I think makes sense because then I'm different, I'm exotic, I'm unusual, I'm out of the ordinary. That makes me attractive. I think a lot of women like the Australian accent. Don't know why, I think it's a terrible accent, but anyway, women overseas seem to love it. So I did notice that as well. I also noticed that if I wrote in the local language, so if I put a profile up in France or Germany or Denmark and I put it in the local language, I noticed that my matches would change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. What I did notice, big one, is if I had a profile in South America, in Latin America, and I wrote that profile in the local language and I said that I was from Australia, that would get even higher results again. So the best results by far in Latin America was local language and say that I'm Australian. I think the reason is that very few women in these countries speak English, or at least very good English at all. And so what would happen is they'd see this guy from Australia, hey, he's cute, but I don't know if I really want to match with him because I can't communicate with him, so what's the point? Once they felt like I could speak their language, even though I was using Google Translate mostly because my Spanish is no bueno, then all of a sudden, you know, they were happy to match with me. So these are things, there's a lot going on when you test in different countries. But for this experiment, I did leave everything the same, again, because I didn't want to taint the results too much by making changes. Now, obviously, no matter what city I was in, anywhere in the world, the quality of my photos was by far the most important thing. And it's going to be for you as well. One thing I noticed with my clients, the guys I work with, either in my online Tinder course or my one-on-one Tinder coaching on Skype, is I noticed that the quality of their profiles is the biggest problem, like the quality of the photos. And guys are often not quite sure what makes them look attractive and what is an instant turn-off to women. So what I've done is I've created a free cheat sheet that you can download right now. You can go ahead and click the link up here. Basically, it's going to have 21 factors that you need to think about when creating your photos for a Tinder profile. What photos are going to be good, what photos you want to avoid, and what photos you definitely want to include. So go through that. It's going to help you get far better results, hopefully, than you're getting now, because I know I'm getting great results, but that's because I know exactly what I'm doing. Download that right now. For the rest, guys, what cities have you tried? What cities would you like me to try? I'm always curious to try different cities around the world. If you like this video, I'll make another one. So yeah, keep me posted on that in the comments. As always, if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel by clicking here, or watch some of my other videos by clicking on the links behind it. I'm Damien. Have a fantastic week. Take care.